Hello, everyone. Welcome to our coffee break with Kardec. I've got my coffee ready. I hope you have yours as well coffee, tea, or a nice cup of hot chocolate. Okay, so for today, I've picked up a subject which is providence, since we've been talking about God. And we have this idea that God is the creator of all things. We now know the attributes of God. So we should talk about providence. What is providence? Providence is God's care for all creatures. So God is everywhere. We know that by now. God sees everything and presides over everything. But we've talked about God's attributes and the universal laws through which all the creation move and it's interesting now to see, to understand, well, is God present everywhere? Does God know everything that happens in all corners of the perceived universe, perceived by us, or the universe that is unseen until now to us as well? So, providence will give us an idea that God is aware of everything. And what are the actions that actually providence consists of? The idea that God is everywhere, it comes from the fact that in the universe, everything in the creation, it is supported by what is called in Genesis, in the book Genesis. And Kardec will develop that in other chapters in detail, or what Kardec called fluids. And these fluids, nowadays, some people discuss if these fluids would be the electromagnetic fields. The idea of electromagnetic fields, they came after Allan Kardec. We had a great scientist, Maxwell, James Clerk Maxwell, this Scottish physicist, who proposed a theory for light as an electromagnetic wave. So this idea, and that was in the 1870s to 1880s. So during those times, he presented his theory. So when Kardec wrote the book Genesis, he had no idea of the development of this concept of electromagnetic waves. But despite saying that, electromagnetic waves, they are material. Material in the sense that our instruments can detect them, our eyes can detect electromagnetic waves in the visible spectrum, and our devices, they all send and receive electromagnetic waves of all sorts, TV sets, mobile phones, and so on. So we couldn't be exactly like that. So the idea we should uh, create in our minds is that this fluid, they are the basis of all the creation, not God, but all the creation. And of course, the spirit itself is not part of this. It is immersed in this fluid, but is not part of this fluid. Thought is a product of the spirit. We'll see that in detail some other time. Uh, but now, what is important to understand that everything in the creation is immersed in this fluid. So, if it's immersed in this fluid, and the fluid is everywhere, so this fluid gives this support to the creation. So, the question is: we know that there are laws, everything in the universe concerning the material world, not just material world where we are now, but material world in different degrees of density in the spiritual world, as I said before, in our physical world that is known to us, or even in those parts of the universe that are still unknown to us. So everything is presided by laws, God's laws, universal laws, the laws of creation. But we could get into thinking that, well, perhaps the universe works like a clock machine, where you have all the parts of the clock working very precisely, in a very precise way. So everything works in that way. So we know that the clock can function by its own once it has, energy to do so. And so it doesn't need the clockmaker to make it work once it's working any longer. So we could think, okay, God created everything and it's just somewhere on a throne watching, and perhaps God can be aware of everything at the same time in his creation. So in this case, due to our limited perception of things, due to our limited perceptions of God, as I've put before, um, we can't understand that God can be everywhere, in all places at the same time. So these laws, they work, but God is the one that gives life to all this. And how come God can be everywhere, in all places at the same time? Is it possible? Yes, we have to go back and try to understand not exactly God, but the Spirit. The thoughts is something that is part of the Spirit. So the Spirit thinks and we have thoughts. And these thoughts, they propagate within the creation through these fluids. These fluids are like, we have to make comparisons with known objects we have in our daily lives. Otherwise, it becomes a bit difficult to grasp the full meaning that Kardec tries to convey to us. Um, so this fluid is like a sensor that we use for something. So we can know exactly what the temperature is somewhere far away from us because we have a sensor there that is sensing that the temperature is, of a certain value, and then we can intervene with that. Okay, let's say we are far away from home, and now with the Internet of Things, it becomes a bit easier for us to understand how it works. We have all our house prepared. We have everything in our house under the control of the internet. So we can, control the curtains in our house, the fridge, the TV set, everything. So we are at work, and then all of a sudden, one of the sensors tells us that the temperature in the fridge is above the maximum temperature that it should be operating. And we can then send a message to the fridge, in inverted commas, and say, okay, switch on now the pump and then make the temperature drop down to this value. And then you do that. And we keep on sensing if the temperature is really dropping or not. So we know that we do things nowadays. We have these rovers on the surface of Mars, the planet, and it is controlled here from Earth. So they know exactly what's going on there, and then they send instructions to this rover to do things, from here. And can you imagine now that with this fluid that is everywhere, there's nothing in creation, from an atom to ourselves, everything is immersed in this fluid because matter actually comes out from this fluid. It is the origin of the world, apart from God, of course, and the Spirit. So God is sensing everything through this fluid. God knows everything, every thought. Let's take the air, for instance, for us to understand the effect of our thoughts on this fluid, how it works. We have the air. And then if we send regions of air that are compressed and expanded, and they move from one side to another, this is the principle of a sound wave. A sound wave is a sequence of regions where the air is more compressed or less compressed, and this region, it moves. This is sound. So this sound is propagating through the air, but it's not the air in itself. It's something that uses the air, that gives the air this property of sound. And on top of that, these variations, they may convey an intelligent message. So in this case, there is an intelligence that is creating this perturbation or this sequence of areas of air compressed and decompressed that they move from one side to another. This is the principle of ultrasound. Perhaps most of us have at least once been to a doctor and done an ultrasound scan. And the ultrasound, we have a probe that sends an ultrasound wave, a much higher frequency, a sound of a frequency which is much higher than sound. That's why we don't hear it, but it's still sound. And it moves. When it finds an object of a different density, it bounces back like an echo. And part of the wave moves forward, part of the wave moves backward now, bounces back. And then the same probe that sends the ultrasound, it detects the waves coming back and it creates an image. We can use that to create an image. So it's more or less like that. So God can be everywhere at the same time. God doesn't need to move from one place to another because it is an infinite. Creation is infinite. And then God would have to move here and there. And then also comes the question, where is God? Is God at the center of our galaxy? Is God in that star or that other celestial body? God is in a black hole? Or no, God is everywhere. The essence of God escapes our senses, our intelligence, our perceptions. And I just want to make a comment here, because we've talked about God in terms of God's attributes, right? So it is using our intelligence, knowing the attributes of God, we can understand what is possible and what is not when we are studying the creation. But that is from an intellectual point of view. What about our moral point of view? The senses are perceptions as spirit, because we are not just intelligent beings. We may perceive something without understanding. We may understand something without actually sensing it, perceiving it. We know that. Sometimes we are very good at giving advices, but we ourselves don't understand the full extent of what we are uh, um, passing on to others. So we should also perceive God. If God is everywhere and God is sensing everything and God is intervening with his attributes, his supreme intelligence, supreme justice, all his virtues. So all God's virtues are everywhere, conducting everything. That's why when we say, well, God is perfect, we should trust God, because whatever we are facing in our lives is for our own good, because we trust that God is in command. And God is inside us. We are a creation. We are part of this creation. If God is everywhere, God is inside us. So when we pray, we shouldn't think, oh, I have to send my prayer, so far away until it reaches God. Or no, God is inside us. And Jesus told us, God is in us as we are in God. And he said, me and my Father are one. Because Jesus, he was so perfect as a spirit that he was 100% tuned with God. We say 100%, but it's not exactly that. Just to give us an idea, because we are so far away from this perfect tuning with God. And that's why Jesus said, me and my Father are one. That meant that God could manifest purely through Jesus, because Jesus had reached this level. We are on that way, we are developing ourselves, but we haven't reached that level yet. So the beauty is that God knows everything. God is everywhere. It's in us. When Jesus taught the apostles how to pray, Abundesmeia, in Aramaic. From the ancient Aramaic they used to speak in Galilee. What Jesus was saying is that God is the supreme love, supreme being. Abon means, is related to father, Abba. And then it was a way of talking to people they loved. They used to call Abba everyone in the family that they liked very much. So Jesus tried to bring God inside each one and said, "Oh, God is that love you feel. God is inside you, who is everywhere. The Shmeya is everywhere in the whole universe. It's not just far away from you because they have a different idea of God." So that's the beauty. So providence exists when we pray. We talk inwardly. We shouldn't think, "Oh, I'm sending this ray towards God in this direction, that direction. I should talk out loud. I should repeat myself many times." No, it's inwardly. It's the sincerity inside us. So providence exists. Providence is actually God's perception and God's action of all the creation. There isn't one single atom. There isn't one single tiniest creatures in the creation that is not perceived and is not intervened in the sense of perfection by God. That's what I had for today for a coffee break. It's time now for us to go. But before I go, I just want to tell you that if you want to leave your comments or questions, you can do it below, and then we check that later. And when it's appropriate, we can bring that question into the coffee break and discuss that. So thank you. See you next time.